My name's James Watts, and we're with the CakePHP core interviews, and this is Jose Gonzalez, also known as Savant, and also known as the resident troll in the CakePHP core. So, first question for you is, why are you called Savant?
I think I was like 11 or 12, and I needed to sign up for an AIM account, and so I was like, alright, fine, let me try to put my name. That obviously doesn't work because my name is very common. And at some point I was like on the internet, and I found this thing that was like a dark savant, right? I guess it was a magic card or something, and I never got into magic cards. So I was like, oh, I'll use that. The name was taken, so I added a 0 to it. And then as I grew up, I was like, oh, that's a little childish, let me just drop the 0, and then eventually I dropped the dark part, so now I'm just savant online.
Okay. So how did you get involved with open source?
So like the first or second year of my university schooling, I was actually part of a group that did sort of websites for local communities or local businesses, and at some point I realized it was completely useless. So I was like, alright, fine, let me try to find a way to boost my programming, and I found the concept of a framework. So I was like, alright, fine, let me try something that'll work on my Mac. And the first thing was Rails. That, for whatever reason, did not install on my Mac, even though everyone said it should have. So then I was like, alright, fine, let me try something else that isn't Ruby. Found a bunch of PHP frameworks, and the only one that really stuck for me was Cake, because the rest of them either took too much time to go through a 30-day tutorial, or just were too complicated for me to understand.
Right.
So.
And your biggest contribution to the core was actually the plugins and packages portal, which is probably the most important, most significant portal for community contributions to the framework. Can you sort of describe a little about how that works and how people can get involved with it?
So the plugins portal is sort of a scraping of some of the information that's on GitHub. So we find a plugin that someone has contributed on GitHub, and then we pull out the relevant information like the stars, contributors, etc. And in a previous incarnation, we would pull out the types of packages that were in there. So they had like a model layer or behaviors or whatever.
Right.
And so what we do now is every once in a while I go through and manually cull the dead plugins, and people can submit new plugins that they have already had. And then particularly active developers, I just check in on them and say, oh, this person has a new plugin, let me add it to the website.
Right. So you're very much involved with the community in that respect, and you're quite out there with the community, you're quite engaged. How do you see the fundamental relationship between the community and the CakePHP project itself?
What do you mean?
So how does the community work with the project, and how does the project depend upon the community?
So I guess there are certain people in the community that really have put themselves out as core contributors, not just the core developers, but people who are very prominent in the community. And so they put out either tutorials or blog posts or open source code or whatever to sort of help other people who are having the same issues. Because obviously when you are working on a problem, if it's generic enough, someone else will also have the issue. So that actually alleviates a lot of the stress on the core team, because there are some things like the migrations plugin that the community has contributed back was something that the core team doesn't have time to contribute to, or doesn't have time to work on. They have the websites and the Cake core and certain other projects to work on. And so the community sort of helps alleviate that, and at the same time, as the framework sort of evolves and sort of sees what the community is doing, it simplifies a lot of the work that the community has to do to make that sort of contribution possible.
So the project is very much built by the community. It's the community involvement which makes it grow, which makes it mature.
Right, yeah. So like, for example, there's various bits of the community that I am not a part of. The Google Groups is a good example of that, where I just never ever show up on that, and I never show up on Stack Overflow, but there are definitely people who they're there and they're helping out in the same sort of capacity that I am on IRC.
And you've been involved with on a core level now for quite some time.
About 2 years.
How would you encourage people to get involved, with the project, to contribute? I mean, what would you say to them so that they can actually get involved too?
So I guess the biggest thing is that a lot of people think that they don't necessarily have the knowledge to contribute. And a very good example of that is the documentation. People complain about it a lot. I actually think it's very good compared to a lot of other frameworks, but it definitely has its rough spots. And there are things that people do that are fairly common that they're just not in the book or they don't belong in the book. It's very easy to contribute back to the book, and it's also very easy to start a blog and just post on it. And so when I was starting with Cake, that was one of the things that I was looking for. There were a couple of people who blogged a lot, and that's where I learned a lot from, right? Whether or not they became core developers or not. And that was very helpful then, and I look back at those blog posts now, and like those are still pretty helpful for new developers.
Right.
So if anything, like the documentation and blogging, there's a two like very not very intensive work, but very easy for people to see when they're coming into the framework
Right.
and sort of help out.
Right, and we're on the crux now of quite an important major version coming up. Very active development. Being someone who's been around the core for some time, how do you see the project evolving? What direction do you see it going in?
So a lot of the movement in Cake 3 has been to make things sort of stand alone. Not necessarily that CakePHP will be broken up into bits, but sort of that we can take bits from the community and sort of plug them in to the application. So one of the things I see is very important is the move to Composer and how we're going to sort of make it easier for the community to say, fine, I don't want to use the cake logging, I want to use monologue, which is something that a lot of the other frameworks use, and sort of bring that sort of mentality in that we're not just CakePHP developers, we also allow you to use other PHP bits, and making that easier for people to do.
Right. Okay, so this is Jose Gonzalez, also known as Savant, and we're done.